This is T West. Welcome to Afro Synergy. News and information on Africa and the African diaspora.
Greetings. In the past, I have shared with you some reports about Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. These reports have been about Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame is the president of Rwanda. I have not had much to say in regards to commentary about this issue because there was yet more information that I needed to know about relative to Paul Kagame. Now today, more information has been provided. This information is coming from various sources. One of the primary sources is Chris Black. You're going to hear this information along with just a little bit of commentary and research from myself. Paul Kagame, it appears, was complicit in the deaths of the president of Rwanda as well as the president of Burundi, according to the findings in these reports. Now, as well, the United States government was also complicit in this. At that time, the president was Bill Clinton. Now, before I get into that, I would like to say that the South African police killing of more than 37 people or miners in South Africa in the mining incident was a situation where most of these people, the autopsy show, was shot in the back. Also, another update, France is now telling the terrorists in Syria that they should form a government and that France will immediately recognize them. Now, these are the terrorists who have been terrorizing Syria for more than a year. Also, the latest report out now is that the United States has more than tripled the sale of weaponry around the world. The biggest seller of weapons around the world to kill people. And an update on Libya. The killing continues on a daily basis almost in Libya. In Tripoli, they have attacked the Sufi Muslims. They have totally torn down a mosque in that area of Tripoli. These are the terrible, terrible crimes that are continuously committed in Libya on an almost daily basis. And also, Israeli veterans are confessing that they have carried out what they call no mercy punishment of Palestinian youth. These are crimes against humanity, and they have been going on for a very, very long time. But of course, as long as the Zionists have the cover of the United States and other permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, they will do whatever they want to do. And I must also say that the earth, wind, fire, and water is punishing America in a very, very big way. The Mississippi River is still extremely low on water. The barges, many of them cannot travel up and down that river carrying goods to markets. America is in trouble, serious trouble, and it's going to get worse. Also, American and NATO forces continuously are being killed by Afghani military forces in Afghanistan. This is continuously happening. It is not getting better there. It is getting worse. It is a war that I have said that America will never win. Now, the article relative to Paul Kagame, the United States, and a trail of dead bodies left behind who were to serve as witnesses to what really happened in Rwanda when the plane that Rwanda's president and Burundi's president were flying on was shot down. There were also French officials on that plane. So in a way, it was a showdown between the United States and France. Yes, even among criminals, they fight among each other sometimes.
Did the United States government and Rwanda's Paul Kagame trigger Rwanda's genocide? This is based upon a document by Chris Black and A. Meziaev entitled DRC and International Criminal Court, New Development. On August 17th, counsel for several Rwandan and Congolese political and civil organizations delivered a complaint to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court concerning crimes allegedly committed by the current president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, which are within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. The complaint filed included United Nations reports dating back to 1994 concerning Kagame's mass atrocities in Rwanda and Congo. These reports, two of which were suppressed by the United Nations and the prosecutors of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, are just a small sample of the extensive and overwhelming evidence which exists in the possession of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda prosecutors that establish that serious crimes against humanity and war crimes were committed by Kagame and his Ugandan and Western allies in Rwanda and Congo since 1990. The reports filed include the report of Robert Gersony of USAID, who was tasked by the United Nations Refugee Agency in later part of 1994 with determining the conditions for the return of Hutu refugees who had fled the Rwanda Patriotic Front's forces into then Zaire that year. In his October 1994 report, Gersony stated that the RPF forces committed systematic and sustained massacres of Hutu civilians beginning in April 1994 and that they were continuing. The United Nations Refugee Agency marked this report confidential and it was suppressed. However, it was placed in the hands of the prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, but the various prosecutors there have also kept it suppressed and even denied its existence. The second report is that of Michael Horrigan, the Australian lawyer and lead investigator for Louis Arbour. When she was prosecutor, she tasked him with the mission of determining who had assassinated the Hutu presidents of Rwanda and Burundi and the Rwandan Army Chief of Staff on April 6, 1994, when their plane was shot down over Kigali. She did so thinking those responsible were Hutu extremists. However, Horrigan learned and had the documentary evidence and testimony to prove it, that the Zero network of the RPF shot down the plane on Kagame's orders with the help of a foreign power. When Horrigan presented this evidence to Arbour, she ordered the investigation terminated and the file handed over to her. No further action has been taken on this evidence since. There is evidence that she stopped the investigation on the orders of the American government. That would be Bill Clinton at that time. This had three consequences. It hid the truth of who was responsible for the events in Rwanda in 1994 from the world. It made Louis Arbour an accessory to mass murder, and at the same time, it established her value as a cooperative asset that the United States of America could use in the aggression against Yugoslavia in 1999 when she was told by Bill Clinton to prevent negotiations and prolong the war by charging President Milosevic with false accusations of crimes against humanity. I will shortly come back to the document written by Chris Black in a moment, but however, I want to now deal with an affidavit of Michael Andrew Horrigan, which is dated November 27th, 2006. I, Michael Andrew Horrigan, lawyer of 61-63 Currington Street, Adelaide 5000, in the state of South Australia, solicitor, make oath and say as follows. Number 1, I am a qualified legal practitioner in the state of South Australia. I was also a former police detective before completing a law degree in 1995, after which time I took up a post as a Crown prosecutor with the Director of Public Prosecution, known as DPP. Number 2, in April 1996, I left the DPP in Adelaide and took up a position as an investigator with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Number 3, soon after my arrival in Rwanda, I was made a team member in charge of a team consisting of about 20 members, and the team was to be known as the National Team. Number 4, I was directed by then Judge Richard Goldstein, who was the chief prosecutor at that time, and Judge Henri Rakotomana, who was then International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda prosecutor, and Mr. Alfonso, who was Director of Investigations, to focus my team's investigations on the following matters. 4.1, to investigate the criminal conduct of Colonel Theoneste Bagosora and then locate and arrest him. 4.2, to investigate the criminal conduct of Colonel Anatole Nsegeyumva and then locate and arrest him. 4.3, to investigate the murder of thousands of Rwandan elite in the first days of the genocide by the Rwandan presidential. 4.4, to identify the person or persons responsible for the fatal rocket attack on April 6, 1994, killing President Habyarimana and all others on board. Number 5, together with my investigators, we conducted investigations into these matters throughout the next year. During the course of 1996, I was called upon to brief Judge Goldstone and then his replacement judge, Louis Arbour, and other senior prosecutors on the progress of our investigations into Bagosora, Nsegeyumva, the Presidential Guard, and the rocket attack upon President Habyarimana's aircraft. Number 6, at no time did Judge Goldstone, Judge Arbour, or any other member of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda ever indicate to me that our investigations into the downing of the President Habyarimana's aircraft were outside the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda's mandate. On the contrary, it was made clear to me that our investigations into the rocket attack upon the President's aircraft was an act of international terrorism which clearly fell within the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda's statute, Article 4, violations of Article 3, common to the Geneva Conventions, which states, Article 4, violations of Article 3, common to the Geneva Conventions and of Additional Protocol 2. The International Tribunal for Rwanda shall have the power to prosecute persons committing or ordering to be committed serious violations of Article 3, common to the Geneva Conventions of August 12, 1949, for the protection of war victims and of Additional Protocol 2 thereto of June 8, 1977. These violations shall include, but shall not be limited to, A, violence to life, health, and physical or mental well-being of persons, in particular murder, as well as cruel treatments such as torture, mutilation, or any form of corporal punishment. And then there's a B and a C. And then D, acts of terrorism, points of focus. Number 7, I am pleased to say that the national team was successful and we achieved the following results. 7.1, we located and arrested and charged Colonel Theoneste Bagosora with genocide and crimes against humanity. 7.2, we located and arrested and charged Colonel Anatole Nsegeyumva with genocide and crimes against humanity. 7.3, we gathered evidence against senior members of the Presidential Guard in relation to the killing of the key Rwandan citizens, including but not limited to UNAMIR protected VIPs, Justice Joseph Kabarunganda, who was President of the Constitutional Court, and Vice President Lando Ndasingwa, who was the head of the Liberal Party. 7.4, In late January or early February 1997, members of the national team were approached by 3 informants, either former or serving members of the Rwandan Patriot Front, claiming direct involvement in the 1994 fatal rocket attack upon the president's aircraft. Their evidence specifically implicated the direct involvement of President Paul Kagame, members of his administration, and military. The informants also advised that the Kagame administration was actively involved in covert operations aimed at murdering high-profile expatriate Rwandans. One such murder was the death of Seth Sedashonga in Nairobi, Kenya. Number 8. With respect to the highly sensitive information from the 3 informants regarding the plane crash, I immediately informed my commander, Jim Lyons. My director, Mr. Alfonso Brewer, was out of the country, and I arranged for him to be told by telephone. Number 9. The information from the sources was very detailed and seemed very credible. I was very concerned about the sensitivity of the information and arranged for an urgent, secure telephone call to Judge Arbour. Number 10. Commander Jim Lyons and I attended at the United States Embassy in Kigali and made a call to Judge Arbour at the United States Embassy in The Hague using an encrypted or secure STU-3 phone. I informed Judge Arbour in considerable detail about the information implicating President Kagame. She was excited by the breakthrough and advised me that the information corroborated some other information she had just learned from Alison Des Forge the week before. At no time did she suggest that our investigations were improper. On the contrary, I would describe her mood as upbeat and excited that at last we were making significant progress into the events surrounding the plane crash. Number 11. Judge Arbour was concerned about the safety of the informants and my men. I advised her that the informants' identities had been kept secure, and if she so directed me, I would arrange for my investigators involved in the plane crash to leave Rwanda. She directed that my investigators should leave, and I agreed to have them travel from the country on suitable inquiries in Nairobi. As for me, I declined to leave Rwanda and advised her that I wanted to stay with my team and assist them completing other important investigations. She consented to this, but asked me to keep in touch with her while she considered what to do with this sensitive information. Number 12. During the next week, I was directed by senior members of the United Nations in Kigali that I was required to travel to the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia in The Hague in order to meet with Judge Arbour and brief her on our investigations in the rocket attack upon President Habyarimana's aircraft. Number 13. Some days later, I was approached at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda's headquarters in Kigali by Mr. Michael Hall, United Nations Deputy Secretary, who is out of New York. He advised me that I would be flying to Arusha the next day on the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda's aircraft, and from there board an international KLM flight to Amsterdam. Mr. Hall asked me to give him any information that I had on the air crash, and he would convey it to the airport in the United Nations diplomatic pouch. I then gave Mr. Hall a single floppy disk containing a memorandum I had prepared for Judge Arbour. Later on, you will hear Judge Arbour ask him if that was, or what she received is the only memorandum that he has given to anyone. And his answer was yes, she received the only memorandum, which actually is not the case. Number 14. The next day, Mr. Hall conveyed me to the Kigali airport where I checked in for the United Nations flight. There, Mr. Hall and I were told that the flight was overbooked and that I could not go to Arusha. Mr. Hall became agitated and told the United Nations flight officer that the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, had personally ordered my attendance in Arusha for an international connection the next day. As a consequence, I was given a seat on the United Nations flight and flew to Arusha. Number 15. The next day I flew to The Hague and overnighted in a hotel near the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Number 16. The following morning I met with Mr. Al Brew, who who is the Director of Investigations, and briefed him on the information concerning the plane crash. Together we discussed forming a special international criminal tribunal for Rwanda investigations unit based outside of Kigali to investigate the plane crash. Number 17. Following breakfast, Mr. Brew and I attended at the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, and we met with Judge Abur. Also present was Mr. Mohammed Othman, acting International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda prosecutor. Number 18. I briefed Judge Abur on the informants and their information regarding the involvement of President Kagame and members of the Rwanda Patriotic Front in the downing of President Habyarimana's aircraft. Number 19. I presented her with a copy of a memo I had prepared entitled Secret National Team Inquiry Internal Memorandum, and this document, which is undated, is attached to this statement. This document detailed the information provided by the three informants. Number 20. To my surprise, Judge Abur was aggressive and questioned me about the source of the information regarding the informants and the quality and the potential reliability of their information. I advised her that the information was given to me by members from my team, the national team. Those members were Amadou Deme and Peter Dinistrinsky. I advised her that I held both investigators in the highest regard. I did say that I was not able to provide any advice as to the reliability of their information, as it had not been tested. However, I did suggest that it was very detailed, and this is itself meant that it could be subjected to considerable forensic examination. Number 21. Mr. Albrew also expressed his strong view that Mr. Amadou Deme and Peter Dinistrinsky were highly effective and reliable men. Number 22. Judge Abur then advised me that the national team investigation was at an end because, in her view, it was not in our mandate. She suggested that the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda's mandate only extended to events within the genocide, which in her view began after the plane crash. Number 23. I was astounded at this statement. I pointed to the temporal mandate of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda being the 1st of January of 1994 until December 31st of 1994. And this clearly covered the time of the plane crash. I also addressed the terrorism and murder provisions of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda statute. Number 24. More particularly, I also told her that this was the first time she had ever suggested that this was outside the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda's mandate. I reminded her that I had personally briefed her before about our investigations into the plane crash, and that she had never ever expressed a view that this matter should be part of an International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda inquiry. Number 25. I expressed my strong view to her that these Rwandan informants were courageous and were deserving of our protection. I cautioned her that the United Nations had a history of abandoning informants in Rwanda, and I specifically reminded her of the United Nations abandonment of Jean Pierre Turatsinze in 1994. He was the mayor of Rusizi district of Rwanda. When he was living, he stated, "We should all eliminate the habit of laziness by working hard and doing all what is possible in our respective places of work and residences in order to jump the poverty line." He also indicated employers should provide workers with work contracts and not fire them arbitrarily. He also promoted employers providing workers with health benefits. Here is another important reference regarding Mr. Jean Pierre Turatsinze. In January 1994, Jean Pierre Turatsinze, a commander turned informant of the militia or a death squad affiliated with the ruling party, the Movement of Democratic National Development, told General Romeo Dallaire, the commander of UNAMIR, a United Nations peacekeeping mission for Rwanda, that he had ordered to register all Tutsis in Kigali. Turatsinze suspected that the plan was to exterminate the entire Tutsi population, explaining that his men were trained to kill up to 1,000 Tutsis in 20 minutes. He offered to guide UNAMIR officials to the large cache of guns. Dallaire informed the United Nations Department of Peacekeeping Operations in New York, headed by Kofi Annan. Annan's office denied Dallaire permission to seize the weapons on the grounds of UAMIR's limited mandate in Rwanda. Now, as you can see today, how the United States controls and wields power over the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, so too did it wield such power over much of what Kofi Annan and his subordinates could or could not do. Number 26. Judge Abur then became hostile and asked me if I was challenging her authority to direct and end our investigation into the plane crash. Number 27. I told her that I was not questioning her authority, only her judgment. I informed her that I was her servant and I would obey her directions. Number 28. Judge Abur then asked me if the memo that I had prepared for her was the only copy. I told her that it was, and she said she was pleased to hear that and placed it in her office filing cabinet. Number 29. She then asked me to leave the room. Number 30. I was extremely concerned at Judge Abur's decision and felt that it was wrong both in law and in policy. Number 31. I returned to Kigali and a short time later resigned from the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Number 32. After my resignation from the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, I was offered a position as an investigator with the United Nations Office of Internal Oversight Services, known as OIOS, in New York. Soon after taking up my appointment, I was asked to provide OIOS investigators investigating corruption within the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda with a statement regarding my service in Rwanda for the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Number 33. On August 1st, 1997, I prepared an internal memorandum detailing various issues which I felt lay behind some of the difficulties with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. A copy of this memorandum is attached here. Number 34. The OIOS leadership were not at all interested in the memorandum, and they expressed their concern at some of the contents of the document implicating the Secretary General in some of the serious events in Rwanda in 1994. Number 35. I completed 6 months with OIOS and resigned. Number 36. I feel that unknown persons from within the United Nations leadership and possibly elsewhere pressured Judge Abur to end the national team's investigation into the shooting down of President Habyarimana's plane. Number 37. Following my resignation, my national team was dismembered. The national team investigations into the plane crash were brought to an end. Number 38. I have suffered at the hands of Judge Abur and the United Nations because my career with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was brought to an untimely and ignominious end. I was proud of serving with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, but I felt that I could not work for Judge Abur when, in my view, she acted for personal reasons against the interests of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the United Nations, and the world community which we served. Number 39. I know the facts deposed to herein to be true of my own knowledge, information, and belief, except where otherwise plainly appears. Sworn by the above named deponent at Adelaide, South Australia, on the 27th day of November 2006. The third report included in the complaints is the mapping report of 2010 to the United Nations Secretary General that details the large-scale atrocities that were committed by the Rwandan Patriotic Front and the Ugandans and the Congolese in Rwanda and Zaire, or which is known now as the Democratic Republic of Congo, from 1993 to 2003. The final United Nations report is the addendum report of the Special Committee of the Security Council, that is the group of experts on the situation in the Congo of June 2012. These United Nations reports are supported by the evidence held by the prosecutors at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and by the evidence presented by the defense in several of the trials as to what actually transpired in Rwanda from 1990 to 1994. This evidence is completely at odds with the accepted Western version, but has been studiously ignored by both the Western media and academics and many so-called experts. The United Nations report giving the International Criminal Court jurisdiction over Kagame is known as the addendum. It is a supplement to the letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations submitted by the group of experts. Once again, it appears there were efforts to suppress this report as the United States tried to prevent its release. These documents present findings that provide a reasonable basis to conclude that crimes within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court have been and are being committed by Paul Kagame and others under his command and control, and which could not escape the attention of the International Criminal Court prosecutor, who was dedicated to eliminating impunity for war crimes. The documented evidence establishes that the Rwandan authorities, led by President Paul Kagame, and including, among others, his ministers of defense, General James Kabarebe, General Charles Kayonga, the Rwandan Defense Forces Chief of Staff, and his permanent Secretary of Ministry of Defense, General Jack Nziza, committed serious international crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo by supporting the M23 rebel group. Specifically, the addendum provides reliable and documented evidence that these officers are providing direct military assistance to the M23 rebellion inside the Democratic Republic of Congo, including the use of children under the age of 18 as M23 combatants, and forced former enemy combatants of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, known as FDLR, to serve with units sent by the Rwanda Defense Forces to reinforce M23. The criminal responsibility of the President Paul Kagame and his subordinates for these crimes is based on Article 28 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court concerning superior responsibility. The mapping report of 2010, which covers the period 1993 to 2003, provides evidence that the crimes committed by Kagame and his allies amounting to genocide against the Hutu people in Rwanda spread into the territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, beginning in 1996 through 2003, where the armed forces of Rwanda, Uganda, and of the Democratic Republic of Congo committed genocide against a Hutu ethnic group in the Democratic Republic of Congo. One Hutu witness at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, who fled 3,000 kilometers through the Congo forest to escape this attempted extermination, called it the genocide with no name, and further testified along with other witnesses that they observed United Nations and United States spotter planes over them before each Rwanda Patriotic Front attack. During the entire period of time in which these crimes were committed, Paul Kagame had command responsibility over the Rwandan armed forces. The complainants in the action of August 17th represent various civil society groups in Rwanda and Congo, and include former senior members of the Rwanda Patriotic Front government in Rwanda. This action is perhaps the first of its kind by Hutus and Tutsis acting in cooperation against the Kagame regime, and provides a basis for optimism that Hutus and Tutsis can come to an accord and can lead Rwanda and its people forward together. They have requested the prosecutor to commence an investigation with a view to laying charges against Paul Kagame and any other person or persons complicit in the crimes set out in the addendum, and they have relied on the stated intentions of the International Criminal Court set out in its preamble that no one has impunity from crimes committed within the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Now, as a commentary note, that is, no one except for the United States government or its UN Security Council permanent members such as France and Britain. The complaint also notes that there is a vast amount of evidence against Kagame in the hands of the prosecutors of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and that while neither this evidence nor that of the Gersony, Hurigan, or mapping reports provide the International Criminal Court with evidence of crimes within its jurisdiction, they do provide evidence that the crimes of Kagame are of a continuing and grave nature and reveal a systematic pattern and intention and add credence to the addendum report. The complainants also note that this protection of Kagame and his allies from prosecution at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has had the direct consequence of giving him a sense of impunity and has encouraged him to commit more crimes. An example of the evidence in the hands of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the Hurigan report being another cited above, is the testimony of the defense witness Abdul Ruzibiza, a former officer of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, who testified in the Military I trial that the assassination of the Rwandan and Burundian presidents in 1984 was planned and committed by the Rwandan Patriotic Front under command of current President Paul Kagame, and that he was a member of the shoot-down team. In September of 2010, Ruzibiza died in Norway at the age of 40 under unclear circumstances and amid rumors of threats against him by the CIA. Now, doing a little bit more research on this, it is also said that he died of a long ailment of cancer. Again, he was a young man. This is not the first death of witnesses who gave testimony or others who were intent on exposing the crimes of the Rwandan Patriotic Front and Paul Kagame. Witness GAP, a prosecution witness in the Military II trial against General Bizimungu, the Rwandan Army Chief of Staff, and who had recanted his testimony as false and extorted by threats of the Rwandan Patriotic Front regime, was recalled in 2009 to the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda to explain his recantation. He never reached the courtroom. He arrived in Arusha and was placed in a United Nations safe house to await his testimony. The day after he was due to testify, he disappeared from the United Nations safe house and has not been seen by anyone since. Protests and a demand for an investigation by defense counsel about how he could disappear from a United Nations guarded safe house was ignored. Now note, only the United States government can put an end to inquiries at the United Nations level. Also, records indicate Bizimungu received a 30-year prison sentence after being arrested in Angola working with UNITA. That was Jonas Savimbi's group in Angola. Seth Singishonga, the former Rwandan Patriotic Front Minister of Interior, was assassinated by the Rwandan Patriotic Front death squad in Nairobi on May 16, 1998, after he announced he was going to testify at the International Criminal Court Tribunal for Rwanda. And he was going to testify that the witnesses provided by the Rwandan Patriotic Front to the tribunal were all forced to give false testimony by the Rwandan Patriotic Front government. Now, assassinations. 3 men, David Kiwanuka, Charles Muhaji, and Christopher Lubanga, were arrested by the Kenyan police. Kiwanuka was claimed to have been Rwandan, despite his typical Muganda name, while Muhaji and Lubanga were identified as Ugandan. The three had been identified in what Punir derides as a story obviously fed by rather untalented Kigali security operatives by Kenyan taxi driver Ali Abdul Nasser, who claimed that these 3 men had tried to hire him as a paid killer because Sindashonga had stolen $54 million in a criminal partnership with Kiwanuka's father, who the Nairobi police claimed to have been the director of immigration services in Kigali, and who had subsequently been supposedly killed by Sindashonga so he would not have to share the loot. This story ran into serious problems when the actual director of immigration services, a man named Charles Butera, surfaced to state that he was alive, that he had no son named Kimanuka, that he knew Sindashonga only as a brief acquaintance, and that nobody had ever stolen $54 million. Despite the problems with the Kenyan criminal case, the three men remained in jail until the 31st of May of 2001. Now, these were the three men who were arrested for supposedly murdering Mr. Sindashonga, who was to testify against Rwandan leaders. Now, the three men remained in jail until May 31st of 2001, when they were released from jail by a court. In a December 2001 hearing, Sindashonga's widow, Siranki Nikuzi, claimed that the Rwandan government was behind the assassination and revealed that he had been scheduled to testify before the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the French Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry. Sindashonga, who had agreed to testify for the defense of the trial of Obed Ruzindana, would have been the first current or former member of the Rwandan Patriotic Front to testify before the International Criminal Tribunal. Nikuzi claims that the Rwandan embassy official Alfonso Imbayire, who was the acting ambassador at that time, organized the assassination. Imbayire was recalled by his government in January of 2001. Immediately after Nikuzi's accusation and shortly before a new hearing was to begin, only to be shot dead by unidentified gunmen in a Kigali bar on February the 7th, 2001. So here you see a trail of assassinations and killings of people who are to testify or who have evidence that would indict certain leaders within the Rwandan government, including Paul Kagame. In December 2005, Juvenal Uwilling Iyumana, a Hutu and former Minister of Trade and Commerce, was found floating in a canal in Brussels, naked, with his hands cut off, after disappearing a few weeks earlier. He had been in contact with Stephen Rapp and two of his investigators, who were pressuring him to give false testimony for the prosecution at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, according to a letter he had sent to the president of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda prior to his disappearance. In the letter to the president of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and to Stephen Rapp, he said that Rapp's two Canadian investigators had threatened to kill him and cut his body in pieces unless he cooperated. He refused to do so and refused to meet with them again. Shortly after that letter was sent, he was murdered. Again, a demand by defense counsel for the suspension of Stephen Rapp and the two Canadian investigators pending an investigation into their possible involvement was ignored. Now, as a note, Canada's operatives are often stooges of the United States government. Also, H.E. Stephen Rapp, the United States ambassador at large for war crimes, certainly cannot be trusted. Now, one of the writers counsel to General Augustin Ndidi-Leyemana, chief of staff of the Gendarmerie of Rwanda in the military coup trial, was himself threatened in July of 2008 by a CIA officer working at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that if he did not watch his step, he would be killed. This threat, echoing previous threats by the Rwandan Patriotic Front, was reported to the president of the tribunal, but he was disbelieved. Scottish lawyer Andrew McCartan, Scotland's foremost military lawyer, was killed in October of 2003 when his car went off a cliff in Scotland, just a few weeks after having told the same writer at a meeting in Toronto that he had tried to confront Bill Clinton about the United States' role in Rwanda and that he had learned secrets about the United States' involvement in Rwanda in 1994 and its control of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Scottish police could find no cause for the car crash, and the Scottish police did put out a bulletin for witnesses to that crash. Now, Mr. Andrew McCartan, who was killed in this car crash, He was also once a photographer on American bombers that bombed Indochina and bombed in Vietnam. In her memoirs, the former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, Carla Del Ponte, reported that Paul Kagame torpedoed the investigation of crimes committed by the Rwandan Patriotic Front, and that the United States government also put pressure on her to leave Kagame alone, and when she refused to sign a document to that effect, she was soon replaced. To no one's surprise, the new prosecutor, Hassan Jallow, immediately lost interest in the Rwandan Patriotic Front and Paul Kagame. In 2010, American Defense Counsel Peter Erlander was arrested by the Rwandan Patriotic Front regime the day he arrived in Rwanda to try to defend FDU Inkingi politician Victoria Ingabire, facing political charges by the regime because he had merely repeated publicly what the evidence was at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda about the Rwandan Patriotic Front crimes. He was only released after extensive intervention by other defense counsel and the reluctant intervention of the United States State Department. The Rwandan and Ugandan invasions of the Democratic Republic of the Congo beginning in 1996 created a severe problem for Africa. Year by year, the situation became worse. In 1999, the Democratic Republic of Congo initiated proceedings against Rwanda in the International Court of Justice. That proceeding was later discontinued because of the Congo's expressed belief in their ability to resolve the matter by negotiation. But in 2002, Congo was forced to institute new proceedings against Rwanda because of technical reasons with very questionable argumentation. The ICJ found no jurisdiction in the case, so the Congolese claims stayed unanswered. That is, the International Criminal Justice found no jurisdiction. The attempts by the NATO powers to indict heads of state for actions committed on the territory of foreign countries using the United Nations as their tool have become more and more frequent, but the leaders targeted for this treatment are those who stand in the way of Western interests, never those that bend to Western interests. We can cite as examples the case against Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic for the alleged planning and fueling of the war crimes in Bosnia, that against Liberian President Charles Taylor for his alleged aiding and abetting crimes committed in Sierra Leone, and finally the case against the Vice President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, J.P. Bemba, for the military assistance in CAR. Paul Kagame is an example of an American-supported leader whose crimes go unpunished because he is useful to them and because they are party to his crimes. The prosecutors of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda have wasted 17 years protecting Paul Kagame from his responsibility for the crimes he and his forces committed in Rwanda in 1994. The consequences has been a continuation of those crimes into the Congo, drowning the Great Lakes region of Africa in blood. Since the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda has refused to act on its responsibilities, it is now up to the International Criminal Court to take up the burden and to commence an investigation into the crimes set out in the addendum report and the crimes committed by Paul Kagame and others who support him since 2003, the date on which the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court begins. The impunity given to Kagame and his allies can only come to an end, and with it the wars in the Great Lakes region, when his crimes and those of the powers that support him are exposed and brought to justice. It is not enough to study the consequences of these wars. It is necessary to understand the reasons and the causes for these wars. The August 17th action at The Hague is an attempt to start the long-delayed process of bringing Paul Kagame and his allies to justice. Now, as a note, when we talk about allies, we're talking about Bill Clinton. We're talking about other American operatives who have been in support of Paul Kagame in this murderous trail. Only when this is achieved can Africans begin to create the conditions for the restoration of peace and the conditions necessary to develop Africa's immense potential. The August 17th action should be supported. That is, supported by the International Criminal Court. Again, they're fighting an uphill battle because the International Criminal Court and the judges and prosecutors, most of them, many of them, fear the United States, and some of them are in the pocket of the United States government and intelligence apparatus.